Hi again. In Kenneth Latourette, A History of Christianity, there's a very brief chapter 10. The setting of the Great Recession is entering into the Middle Age period here. Latourette says the seeming triumph of Christianity in winning the professed allegiance of the Roman Empire carried with it a major threat. In the preceding chapters, we noted the fashion in which Christianity was imperiled by the extent to which a large proportion of those who bore the Christian name were compromising with the non-Christian environment in which they were immersed. We also saw the manner in which the church was being interpenetrated by ideals which were quite contrary to the gospel, especially the conception and use of power, which were in stark contrast to the kind of power exhibited in the life and teachings of Jesus and in the cross and the resurrection. A nearly related but somewhat different danger was the close association with the Roman Empire and Graeco-Roman culture which that victory brought. Although before it had completed the first 5 centuries of its course, Christianity had begun to spill over the boundaries of the Roman Empire. By the end of that period, it had become almost identified with that realm and its civilization. The overwhelming majority of Roman citizens thought of themselves as Christians, and the large majority of those who bore the Christian name were Roman citizens. The Catholic Church, which embraced most of those who counted themselves as Christians, had grown up within the area which had been given political unity by the Roman Empire, and in its structure reflected the pattern of that empire. While strikingly original in its essence, Christian theology had perforce employed Greek and Roman terms and had utilized concepts drawn from Greek philosophy. By the year 500, the Roman Empire and Greco-Roman culture were in decline. Christianity had both weakened them and prolonged their life. In succeeding centuries, their disintegration was accelerated. Could Christianity survive their demise, or would it share their growing debility and ultimate death? That Christianity was seriously affected by the fatal sickness of the Roman Empire is one of the most palpable facts of history. For more than 4 centuries, the outcome was by no means clear. In the numbers of those who called themselves Christian, in apparent inner vitality, as expressed in fresh movements inspired by the faith, in the moral and spiritual quality of the churches which were the official vehicles of the gospel, and in its prominence in the total human scene, Christianity lost ground. The Roman Empire suffered from both internal weaknesses and external pressures. We've already noted that the weaknesses, in part, antedated the coming of Christianity, that they were, for a time, allayed by the imperial system inaugurated by Augustus Caesar, but that from the end of the 2nd century they began again to be apparent, were aggravated and multiplied. The external pressures were by invaders who took advantage of the internal decay to overrun most of the empire. Their inroads accelerated Rome's decline. The main incursions were from 2 directions, from the north and northeast on the one hand, and from the southeast on the other. Those from the north and northeast were by peoples who were thought of as by barbarians and whose cultures were of a lower and more nearly primitive stage than that of the Romans. By the way, he has lower and primitive here in quotation marks. Their cultures included their religions disintegrated under the contacts with what was left of Greco-Roman civilization, and by the year 1000 most of the northern invaders who had settled in what had once been the Roman Empire had taken on the Christian name and were in part conforming to the remnants of Greco-Roman culture which had survived their conquests. Those from the southwest, the Arabs, were the bearers of a new and vigorous religion, Islam. While in some ways they too were barbarians and took over much of the cultures of the peoples of high civilizations whom they subdued, their religion almost entirely supplanted the faiths of the conquered populations. From the 7th into the 10th century, the Muslim Arabs mastered about half of the lands which had been ruled by Rome. This segment also embraced about half of what might be denominated Christendom. In it, the Christian churches dwindled more or less rapidly. With the possible exception of Judaism, Christianity proved more resistant to Islam than the faith of any other people whom the Arabs overran. And in 2 regions, the Iberian Peninsula and Sicily, it did what no other religion accomplished. It eventually won back extensive areas and populations from the prophet. However, they did not come at once. This rather did not come at once. For several centuries, the record was one of progressive losses of the cross to the crescent. Christianity not only survived these disasters, eventually it forged ahead to fresh advances which carried it farther geographically than it had gone in the first days of its might. Some of the gains were made while major losses were being suffered on other fronts, but most of them were not to be achieved until much later centuries. Christianity even proved to have profited by the breakup of the Roman Empire, for in the West, largely freed from the latter, it eventually displayed renewed vigor and a long series of fresh creative movements. In this recovery from the disintegration of the closely allied Roman Empire, and in this subsequent spread, Christianity surpassed the record of any other religion. A religion is often an integral part of a particular culture. When a culture disappears, the religion associated with it also tends to die out. Some religions prove to have more vitality than the cultures with which their early developments have been connected and outlast them. In its ability to survive the passing of cultures with which it has been intimately related, to win back territories in which it has experienced grave losses, and to gain peoples of other cultures, Christianity has been unequaled. Buddhism, absorbed by Hinduism in its native land India, lived on outside of India and was reintroduced into India by immigrants. Yet most of its geographic spread was prior to the assimilation of its Indian constituency by Hinduism, and since then it has thrown out few new movements. Islam survived the decay of the Arab Empire, through which it had its initial spread, and capturing other peoples, notably the Turks, enjoyed fresh geographic expansion through them. In Persia, partly divorced from Arab culture, it gave rise to fresh developments. Yet, in general, Islam has been closely tied to the Arabic language and to Arab culture, and apart from that connection, it has not displayed much vitality. Judaism did not perish with the disappearance of the little Jewish state, which centered in Jerusalem, but compared with Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity, it has won relatively few converts outside its own community, a community which has never been able to break away from its narrowly ethnic traditions and become universal. Hinduism and Indian culture have been inseparable, and Confucianism has been identified with the particular form of Chinese civilization of which it has been the core. Christianity continues to bear the imprint of its Jewish heritage and of the Graeco-Roman world into which it first moved. But more than any other of the faiths of mankind, it has proved its capacity to outlast cultures with which it has seemed to be identified, and some of which it has helped to create. Freed in part from the crippling compromises of the gospel which that association entailed, it has inspired fresh movements within itself and in its milieu. It has resumed its expansion, and more it has approached the universality which has been of its essence. So he's writing this some 70 years ago, and Latourette would be amazed, I think, maybe not, by the expansion of Christianity within those 3 generations since he wrote it. Namely, that Christianity is flourishing in parts of the world where even when Latourette was born, earlier in the last century, it was not flourishing. That primarily would be the Far East, Africa, and South America. Evangelical religion is stronger than ever in all three of those continents: East Asia, South America, and Africa. I'll put in a link to Jacques Ellul's examination. Several videos actually linked together here. I'll put a link to the first of them where he's talking about the mixed blessing of Christian expansion. Also, I'll put in a link to the Jacques Ellul playlist. See you soon.